Hello and welcome to the 2019 NPAL Mentoring Budget Development webinar. My name is David Cook and I'm a Senior Project Coordinator at FirstPick, and we help National PAL with managing the mentoring grant. So moving on into actually entering an NPAL mentoring budget in the online reporting site, the first thing to keep in mind is this URL right here. This is the National PAL online reporting site. It's the same one that's been used for the past couple of years for returning grantees. For new grantees, please bookmark this site. The preferred browser is Chrome, so just keep that in mind also. The login credentials for returning organizations will remain the same as last year. So in other words, your email address and then whatever your password may be. If you have forgotten your password for any reason at all, there is a password reset link. But perhaps the easier way to make sure that your password gets reset is to email support@firstpick.org, and we can make sure that your password will be able to get reset for you. So when I send out the slides for this webinar, there is going to be a lot more detailed information on expenses, on notes, on, there's going to be a step-by-step walkthrough of how to enter a budget on the online reporting site. But for the purposes of this webinar, I wanted to do a live walkthrough just to show you all exactly where you should be clicking and what everything should look like. So for those of you who are returning grantees, this should be pretty familiar. This screen right here, this is the National PAL dashboard. And for the time being, we're going to focus on this subgrants tab. So the first thing you want to do is click on subgrants. When you get here, you're going to see something like this. This is a test dummy account, so it might look a little bit different to what you will actually see in the live site, but basically, for those of you who are returning grantees, you're probably going to have more than one grant here. You may even have the 2 previous years here, but please just make sure you're clicking on the 2019 subgrant. It will have that in the subgrant name. The status will be incomplete, whereas your grants from a previous year should be approved. So that would be the other way of knowing. And then your award amount for this dummy account here, I have $34,200. It will be whatever was in your award notification email. So once you've identified the correct subgrant, you click on this hyperlink here. It brings you to a page that looks like this. You're going to scroll down a little bit and click Update Budget. And on this first screen here is where you enter your personnel items. So the first thing you want to do is click Add. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some employees here. So this is the name of the employee, obviously in the name field, and then their title. This should be the title as it's going to appear on their timesheets, and it should be clearly identifiable what this employee's title is. If they are an hourly employee, you click hourly. If they are salaried, you leave it blank. Fairly straightforward. We'll look at a salaried example in a minute. And then I'm going to put my rate here, and obviously that is an hourly rate. So in this total hours per week column here, you're putting the total hours that this employee works for your organization in any given week. So if it's a full-time employee, that would be typically 40 hours. And if it's a part-time employee, it could be anything under 40 hours. But keep in mind that is per week here. And then grant hours per week is the hours that are going to be specific to the NPAL mentoring grant. So in this example, we're saying they're going to work 25 out of 40 hours on the NPAL mentoring grant. These dates here, the start and end date, these may be slightly different in the actual live site, but for now I've used April 1st of 19 to March 31st of 2020, so it's an exact year. And then on this next column, this next line here is where we enter our fringe benefits. Now, you do not have to include fringe benefits. That's something to definitely keep in mind. Many people feel like it's a little bit complicated. We absolutely encourage you to include fringe benefits if that's something that you are able to do. But if you either do not pay fringe benefits or if you feel like it's too complicated, it's not a requirement of the grant. But keep in mind here that FICA is Social Security and Medicare, and it should be 7.65% of an employee's annual salary that gets entered in this box. In this example here, because this is an hourly employee, I would calculate their FICA by trying to figure out what their salary is, and then entering the 7.65% of that amount. We're going to send out a calculator that will help you to calculate this, but for now I'm just going to put in the amount here, and again, this is for the entire year. And I'm going to go over to my other category, and I'm going to add in. At any time during this process, you can hit update amounts. And what it's going to do right here is it's going to give me my total salary, and it's going to calculate a percentage. So in this case, it's basically taking my rate times my grant hours per week times the exact number of weeks that I'm going to be working on the grant based on the start and end date. You can adjust this start date if you had an employee that was going to start later in the year, but I would encourage you to probably keep that end date the same and adjust the start date in order to get the exact number of weeks that you want the employee to be included on the grant for. Keep in mind, however, that just because I have let's say I change this start date to June 1st, that doesn't mean that you cannot submit any time for that person before June 1st. On this screen, we're just using it in order to calculate a budget, and we understand that budgets are not set in stone, so don't feel like you're tied into a specific date range just because you included that in your budget. The number that you're really tied into is this. This is how much salary you can claim during the year. And what happens on this next row is you're typing in the full fringe benefits for the entire year. The system is taking that and it's dividing it by, or it's multiplying it by your percentage here. So it's taking your FICA amount, which is this, plus your other amount, which is this, and it's actually getting your fringe benefits allowable to the grant, which is 62.5% of these numbers combined. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind here. We would like to see notes for all employees, and we'd like the notes to be really quite descriptive this year. So we're going to say something like June Doe is the program coordinator for the NPAL mentoring program. And like I was saying, this is where you would mention if you had an employee who was maybe an executive director, but maybe also doing program implementation. This is where you would enter that information. So you go ahead and enter, a couple of lines of information here. If you were including something in this other category under your fringe benefits, we would like you to include some information in here on that. So in this case, we're saying other is unemployment at 4%, just so we understand what that is, the 70324 here. I'm going to move on to add another employee here now. So we're going to have our second employee. He's going to be the CEO. In this case, he's not an hourly employee, he's salaried, so we leave this box blank and we type in his annual salary here. Again, we're seeing total hours per week and grant hours per week. In this case, he's going to work less time on the grant. We're going to go through and we're going to enter in some numbers as far as FICA, medical. If you are including medical, this should be the annual premiums. So in other words, in this scenario, it would be the cost to the employer is $300 per month. So you would include an annual premium of $3,600. So keep in mind that all of these are annual. The same for dental. We have short-term disability, long-term disability, life, and other. I'm going to go ahead and just, these numbers are all obviously just test numbers, but in your case, you would have to be able to back this up when it came to claiming the reimbursements. I'm going to click Update Amounts again. Again, this is where I would put in my detailed notes. I'm not going to go through the full thing, but when I send this out, we'll have some examples of some notes that you would put in for this other employee also. So that's the personnel screen. Again, hit Update Amounts at any time. You will notice in the bottom right here, we have a running requested amount. We're at $22,948.14 for our personnel at this stage. So that looks good to me, and I'm going to go ahead and when I'm confident that this is okay, I'm going to hit Next. Next will automatically save your budget. At this stage, I could hit Save and Exit and leave and come back to it later. But as long as you're ready to move on to the next page, you can click Next, and you can be confident that that will save anything on that page. So clicking Next brings up your general expenses categories. I'm going to go ahead and click Add. And I'm going to go down the list here and add some common expenses and some notes that I would put in there. So we have Community Service Project. This is going to be under Other Costs. For the monthly rate, I would advise you to keep the monthly rate blank. It is easier to put in a total expense that you will use over the course of the entire year. It's going to be easier for you to calculate and get it exactly right in that way. So, like I said, for the Community Service Project, we're going to budget $2,000, and we are going to require notes for every line item here, just so we're clear on what is being budgeted. So for Community Service Project, and I'm going to ask that people use these exact notes unless you have more detailed information on your Community Service Project. But for now, we're going to say estimated costs towards the Community Service Project. This will be updated further. So obviously you need to know a little bit more about your specific curriculum and about the program before you can decide what your community service project will be. That's why we're just asking that for now you have these notes in here. As you get further in the year and you have more details on your community service project, you can update this and make sure that you're running those estimated expenses by us, just to make sure that both the community service project itself is an appropriate project and that the expenses will be reimbursable. I'm going to save that. Again, at any time on this page, I can hit Update Amounts down here. And what that's going to do is it's going to add this 2,000 to my total from the previous page that had the personnel. So my next required item is my curriculum. And again, that comes under the other costs category, and we're calling this 1,000. If you did know what curriculum you were using at this stage, like if you're using the Badges for Baseball curriculum or the McGruff curriculum, you could enter that information here. But otherwise, it is fine if you enter specific curriculum. And that just lets us know that you are budgeting the $1,000 for curriculum, but that you're waiting until you have further information before you actually choose that curriculum. So save and close those notes. And the next thing we're going to add here is a field trip. And what we're actually asking this year is for you to do field trips a little bit different. So for those of you who are returning grantees, you may have in previous years included all field trips as one big bulk item under your travel. What we're asking this year is that you actually break it out to be a little bit more transparent on what the actual costs will be. So we're going to ask you to have admission expenses separate from travel expenses and from any snack expenses, such as purchasing lunch for the kids when you're on a field trip. So as we get further down this budget, we'll look at that a little bit more. But again, in here, you should put some information, such as, just some general information about what you anticipate the trips to be. Trip to a museum for all NPAL mentoring mentees and mentors. 40. So something like this. So if you were perhaps planning a trip to a museum for all of your NPAL mentorings and mentors and mentees, you would include that information, and you would just include a brief calculation of how you had arrived at that number. It doesn't have to be anything too detailed, but just a brief idea of what you were planning. It could be more than one trip, so you could maybe have 2 or 3 trips that you have planned. But just put that information in there and just note that you will be requesting admission expenses for those. We save that note and update amounts again. And we're now at this number here. We're ultimately trying to get this number in the bottom right to be exactly the same as the number in the top right. So moving on down, we're going to start adding some supplies items. So I talked about general office program supplies line item, so we can include that here. We changed the category here to supplies. Put a number in here, and in here you're going to put just some information about the kind of office supplies that you may be purchasing. And it always helps to say to be used 100% for the NPAL mentoring program. You may think this is overkill, but whenever possible, when you're entering notes, specify that it's going to be used 100% for the NPAL mentoring program, just to make it very clear that these supplies are purely for the NPAL mentoring grant and are not general supplies for your organization, even though we all understand that that is obviously the case. I'm going to hit update amounts again and add my next supplies line item, which is snacks, field trip meals. And again, that's a supply. So we're including our snacks. These would be general program snacks, so snacks that you might provide for the kids during your mentoring sessions, and it would also include something like lunch that you may provide for kids on a field trip. But keep in mind that lunch or any meals can only be covered if it's an all-day field trip covering a regular mealtime. Lunch or dinner can never be provided as an event in itself. It has to be just purely for sustenance when the kids are and the mentors are out all day over a mealtime. So in here, this would be snacks such as chips, pretzels, etc. Lunch for all-day field trips. I'm not going to go into too many details here, but when I send out you will see that there's some sample notes attached to the email that gets sent out to you. So please look at those sample notes and make sure that you're putting the notes in as close as possible to what we suggest. That way, it decreases the likelihood that we will have to send your budget back to you for any reason. So when I'm done entering those notes, I hit Save and Close. And moving on down to T-shirts. T-shirts are something that, for those of you who are returning grantees, you'll note that we have allowed T-shirts in the past. There are some limits, and this will be in the information that gets sent out, but we're seeing $15 for a T-shirt or $25 for a hoodie or sweatshirt. So the T-shirts themselves should basically be for safety and identification purposes when the mentees and mentors are on field trips in the community. These shouldn't be fashion items. We're talking like basic cotton T-shirts with screen printing charges. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the other thing that we're asking is obviously that is only the amount of T-shirts to cover the number of youth and mentors in your program. So we're going to say something like T-shirts are for safety and identification purposes on field trips. And again, we would ask that you specify that they are for the NPAL mentoring program exclusively. Moving on down, we're going to get to our travel expenses. So up above we had our end of year trip admission. Down here we're going to have our end of year trip travel. Okay, and this is going to come under your travel category. And this is what I was talking about, is a little bit different to what we did last year, where we allowed you to lump all of this in as one line item. We are asking you to break this out a little bit. So we're going to say that this is a bus rental for end of year trip to museum, and we're going to save that. Update my amounts again and see where I'm at with my budget. I'm at 34.2. Okay, so I've got a little bit to go. Moving on down in travel. You can include transportation expenses related to picking up supplies for the program. So we'll send more specific details about this, but what that means is you can claim the federal rate, the mileage rate of 58 cents per mile if you use your personal vehicle for any PAL-related, for NPAL mentoring-related business. So that would include things like picking up supplies at Walmart, or really any travel that you do by personal vehicle that's specifically for the grant. Now, if you have a PAL-owned vehicle, a van, you cannot claim mileage, but you can claim gas expenses. So that would just be the cost of gas of using the vehicle to transport kids around, to pick them up maybe for mentoring sessions. And we would ask if you are claiming gas, that it's just a reasonable amount. And again, this is something that you could put in the notes, but just to give us an idea of over the course of the year, you know, you're going to travel 200 miles picking up kids, and you know the based on the miles per gallon of the vehicle, you're going to claim something like $50 or $60 for those expenses. And as long as it seems like a reasonable amount, we're not going to question it too much. But of course, you know, keep in mind that when you actually come to claim those expenses, you are going to have to provide gas receipts. If you're claiming the mileage rate, the only thing that you will have to provide is a purpose of the trip and a Google Maps document or some other mapping document that will show the mileage actually traveled. But more details of that will be provided in the reimbursement request webinar. Like I say, for the budget, we're really looking at an estimate of what those costs will be during the year. So we would say something like travel by personal vehicle to pick up NPAL. So something basic like that would suffice, but obviously the more detail that you can provide, the better. Again, I'm going to hit my update amounts button here because I'm getting close to the full amount. Okay, so my final item here will be the Youth Summit. And again, for those of you who attended last year, you should be fairly familiar with the expenses that can be covered. To recap, it would be flights to the Washington, D.C. area where we are. The information we have at this stage is that it will be at the same location, the Bulger Center in Potomac, Maryland. So it would be flights to the Washington, D.C. area. It would be the summit expenses for the Bulger Center. It would be any airport transfers, such as shuttle buses or rental cars, to transfer the youth from the airport to the Bulger Center. And it would be the per diem amount, and that's something that we'll tell you more detail about closer to the time. But like I say, for returning grantees, use that same kind of formula that you've used the past couple of years. And for new grantees, we're going to reach out and give you a little bit more information so that you can enter this information in your budget. So for the purposes of this this webinar, I'm going to put in my exact amount that I have left over here for my Youth Summit expenses. And like I say in my notes here, I'm going to say something like flights, per diem, hotel expenses for 4 mentees and 2 mentors at Youth Summit. Save that. And I'm going to hit my update amounts. And you'll notice that my requested amount down here is exactly $34,200, which was the same as my award amount. So that's what you really need to try to be aiming for, is to get it right onto the penny. You obviously don't want to leave any money on the table, and the system would not allow you to submit for any more than $34,200. So if you do need to make a small adjustment here or there, if you are off by a few dollars, go ahead and add it to the largest line item. It's not going to make a huge difference over the course of the year. Obviously, try and make sure every expense is as close as possible to what you're actually going to spend. However, as long as it's within a little bit of a buffer of around 10%, we're not going to, we're not going to not reimburse you a little bit more or a little bit less for any individual line item, because we understand that a budget is a moving thing, and it's not set in stone. So don't worry too much about getting everything exact to the penny, as long as you can be pretty confident that these are approximately the amounts that you're going to spend during the year. If anything changes dramatically, if this youth summit number was going to end up being like $2,000 or $3,000 more, we would require you to update your budget for that, but that would be something that you could reach out to National PAL and our First Pick to have us walk you through the process for doing that. So that's not a big deal if you do need to update your budget during the year. A couple of things I just want to show you before we conclude. If you had any general notes about your expenses, there is a section here where you could add those. We do ask that the majority of the notes are added in your line item notes here, and because we have these speech bubbles here, you can always go back in, and if there's something that you forgot to add, you can add it in there and hit save and close. If you make a mistake and you enter something that you didn't mean to enter, while you're at this stage and you haven't submitted your budget yet, you can select a box here and you can click delete and that will go away. I'm not going to do it right now, but that would just remove that line and it would remove the $600 from the overall budgeted amount. You can also go back to your previous page to look at your personnel, and again, by hitting previous there, it automatically saved everything on my supplies page. But again, here, if you wanted to delete John or Jane Doe, you could do that. For personnel, actually, it's a little bit different, and if you select here, you're going to hit mark inactive. So it won't absolutely disappear, but it will. It would take that that allocated expense out of your budget. But yeah, if you need to go back and adjust your personnel a little bit, you're absolutely free to do that at this stage. Again, there's some general personnel notes there if you were to need to add any of them. I click back through into my supplies page. If you had an attachment that you needed to upload, some examples might be maybe some backup documentation for your fringe rates, things of that nature, or any kind of documentation that you feel may help provide some additional context on any of your expenses. You are free to upload that there. It does have to be a PDF. On the reporting site, whenever you're updating a document, it has to be a PDF. So just keep that in mind. But that would be the final thing to note there. And when you are ready, of course, you're going to move down here. If you needed to save and exit, maybe you needed your CEO to review the budget before you submitted it, you could still do that. So you're free to do that. But at this stage, I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And you will notice that your status in the top right here changes to pending review. If I click back through to my subgrants tab, again, it is now pending approval. You want your budget to say pending approval. If it doesn't say that, you're not complete, so please make sure it says that. If it doesn't say that, then we here at First Pick have no way of knowing that it's ready to review. But as long as that's the case, eventually you should hopefully see it move to approved status, and that's when you know your budget is ready and you can start submitting reimbursement requests. We'll send further information about that in the near future. And if any changes are required, you may see a revisions needed status here. You will also see some notes from the reviewer at First Pick and or National PAL. So keep a close eye out on that. If in either case, if the budget is approved or if revisions are needed, you're going to get an automated email sent to your email on file. So that would be another way that you would know. But feel free to keep checking back on this status on this subgrants view. So for the time being, that concludes the budget development webinar. I hope this has been helpful for you. Like I say, there's going to be some additional documentation sent out with this email that's going to help provide additional context on how to create your budget. We have those office hours available, and throughout the course of the year, our contact information is also going to be sent out along with this email. Throughout the course of the year, you will be in touch with the program and finance team here at First Pick, in addition, of course, to your primary contacts at National PAL. So that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you.